First thing on the agenda is to adopt the agenda. Have a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Keith
Morrow.
Keith Morrow.
I will second.
Second. Mary
Mary
Messenger, second. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah. All right. All those opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. Next item is to approve the minutes of the August 17, 2021 meeting. I have a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
So moved, Keith. Second.
Second.
Second, Rebecca. Any discussion? Erica?
I just wanted to clarify on in part 7, my clarification also included after the part that says the tasking committee is to create the best proposal for a merger, and then consider whether to recommend this proposal or not, and then share it with the school board.
Do you want to move to make that amendment?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
If the second agreeable to that amendment.
That's your agreeable to the amendment, Keith? Okay. So, any other discussion? Okay. So we'll vote on whether to approve the minutes as amended. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. Where did you get those? Yes. Right, the next item on the agenda is we've got Keith Morrow is going to give some background context for the merger study, basically why the Addison Northwest Supervisory District wanted to have this merger study committee, and then John Griswold is going to give that. We're going to invite her to give that for the Montana Union School District. So Keith, you want to start us off?
Sure. I will try to keep this relatively short and sweet. I mean, the overarching reasons everyone knows, they're the same reasons we're all here. Declining enrollment and declining population in our district over the last decade have led in the last 3 or 4 years for our district us to have to engage in a number of difficult discussions in our district and to make difficult choices, particularly in the hopes of maintaining or at least not. We would love to grow, but growing curriculum right now it's not really in our purview. So our aim has been largely to ensure that we're not cutting programming, which has become increasingly difficult year by year. Out of the last 4 years, we've managed to reduce our budget in 3 of those years, which was a fairly Herculean task in and of itself. But we've also arrived at a place where there's not much, there aren't many movable parts left to shave out of the budget without starting to seriously affect student opportunity. And that would, how that would look would be cutting some of the really extra but essential things, AP curriculum, sports, all those things that often get talked about when talking about budget cuts. We don't really have much left to squeeze out of the district. So that has really brought us to a place where we're looking for external options. And then that's where we were at when this merger study came about. The district continues to do its work looking internally. This represents hopefully an option or a chance for us to find some sort of common ground outside of our district that could assist us in getting through this population decline, which is significant. I mean, if you have not seen the census data yet, every single town in our district has lost population to some degree or another in the 2020 census. So projections for continued declining in enrollment in the population seem to have been confirmed with that data. So in terms of what we've done within our district to get here, I'll just give you a quick overview. We have done some in-district reconsolidation. We have repurposed one of our elementary schools within the last few years. This last academic year was the first year that repurposed school was fully functioning. We've merged elementary students from that school into another elementary school within our district. Our central office has also, we've cut staff in buildings and in central office. In terms of more positions to cut, we already have a central office that's fairly small for our district size. As I mentioned, we've really cut a lot of the extraneous things that we can without really damaging programming. And further reconfiguration of buildings within our district really looks to have fairly weak returns, and just in regards to the finances of it, but also at this point stands to really dramatically affect student experience even more if we keep reducing the number of buildings. So that doesn't seem to be a great option for us as well. Based on our 2024 estimates, if we keep everything status quo, we cut no programming, we cut no staff, roughly speaking, we're looking at a 30% tax increase by 2024. That's a pretty big hike and probably one that the community would not support. I would be very surprised if they would. Other than that, we have, I think, really looked high and low within our district, and we're looking for more external options, and that's what brought us to the table here. Am I missing any big pieces here? Okay.
Does anybody have any questions for Keith?
No.
Brad?
Yeah, just as a point of information, when you talk about the data for the demographic projections of enrollment, is that the same data that is in the packet of information that we were distributed?
Well, we did a NASDAQ study, and when was that?
It's 2020, right?
Same time.
Yeah, around the same time.
So it's the same data that we've been given in the packet.
I believe.
Has that data been updated since 2020?
I mean, we've updated our current enrollment.
Yes,
but,
we've updated our own version of that, but our version and their version are in strong alignment. So,
But not more broadly, just within the USS district.
ANWSD updated the enrollment projections, yes.
Anybody else have any questions? Dawn, would you speak right on up?
You sound over here out of that fan. It is.
Yeah, why don't
really
we
hard
try-
to hear what you were saying.
Why don't we
During
try
the
shutting
service.
it off? Right, that's great.
So those people on that can hear. Now you don't have the benefit of the breeze.
Thanks, Dawn. Yeah, go ahead, Dawn.
So MAUSD shared a lot of the same financial pressures that Keith mentioned and the program problems as well. We began hearing about it in 2017 when we tried to pass the last a bond vote to renovate the high school. People started talking about it then. It then 2 years ago came up again when we were having community conversations. People were saying, you know, what can you do? Can we do anything with neighboring school districts? And so again, that seed was there again. And then we did our survey last two falls ago. And again, people are saying, what kind of services, what can you share? What can you work together to find some savings so that we're not stripping programs out of all of our schools? So the Mount Aid board really wanted more information. They want to know if there are more ways, you know, beyond a merger of two schools, but what other options are there to provide some cost savings and help us keep our programs with some substance to them. And so, you know, we're just looking for more information. I think when one of the board members made the motion to form this committee or to begin work towards this committee, she said, we just need all the information we can get. We need to know what all the options are, if they would work or they wouldn't work. We just need information. So we really got into a lot of members got into it, wanting just to know all the possibilities. So we still have the same declining enrollment and the same rising fixed costs. So like I said, we share a lot of the same common reasons that we're struggling. So,
Anybody have any questions for John?
I don't know when to ask this or what, but like, so have either of these districts spoken to Middlebury? Like, they're a little bit in the same boat.
Yeah, we did talk with them in the beginning because we wanted to try and do a county-wide thing, but
Yeah.
they were a little further along in the process, so they responded that they wouldn't join us. They're open to the idea, but they were on another path, so they were just going to continue on, and we decided we were kind of in the same boat, so we might as well work together.
Okay.
How recent was that conversation
Which conversation?
with Middlebury?
Well, it was.
In the weeks prior to the joint board
Meeting.
meeting between ANWSD and
A
MAUSD.
couple months ago, 3 months ago?
Well, that would have been, I guess, what did this?
Spring, in the spring
So
of this
probably
year.
March?
Yeah,
Yeah.
March.
Because just before we started, just before we had that joint meeting, we had spoke with them and they still said, we're gonna hold.
Don, I had a question. So Keith was saying that their estimates show that if they kept the same programming by 2024, there would be a 30% increase. Do you have any idea what those numbers might look like for a project for Mount Aid Union School District?
I could dig for it. I don't have it handy right now, and I'm not remembering in terms of percent increase in the taxes. It's the same story. The numbers may be different. We would be assuming lots of things, spending threshold coming back, or et cetera, which 24 is the year that it's intended to come back at this point. We'd be looking at being in the neighborhood of millions over the spending threshold without some sort of change. Reduction in spending, usually meaning reduction in personnel, which, as Keith mentioned, at some point, when you reduce personnel, you're reducing programming, and we're approaching that point as well. So it really could have been ditto.
We actually started to do our financial projections using the same template that Mount Aid uses so that it's easier to compare. So I think we can dig that out and supply that to you. You have the
Yep.
same format,
Exactly.
I believe. And that's where Keith was pulling those figures from.
Great, yeah.
Hard to hear.
So we started using the same templates for communicating about budget projections so that it would be easier to look across the two districts. So we can make sure you get copies of those financial projections.
Thanks, yeah. Anybody else have any questions or? Okay, thanks, Don.
Thank you.
Tracy, you're up next with some updates from the last meeting.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that we carved out a little bit of time, and that was faster than I thought it might be. So I definitely am looking forward to spending some more time on some other items on the agenda tonight. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about some details from our last meeting. Not sure when I got the meeting brief to you. You might not have gotten it till today or a couple of days ago. I will get that to you more quickly in the future so that you have a resource for community communication, answering questions, front porch forum, whatever your district communication norms are. We'll get in more of a groove as we continue to work together. I also wanted to ask that you extend as much patience as you can this evening through the meeting. The way the agenda is framed is not linear. And different parts of the agenda might bring up questions that may merit a richer discussion at a different part of the meeting. I'm going to give you a quick update on what we know about Lincoln, for example, but we might want to save any discussion or questions about possible implications of someone withdrawing from one of the districts till we talk about governance options. So Mary Kate will facilitate as well as she can, and we just ask your patience as we're layering bricks to create a common understanding, but sometimes we might miss a brick that you're looking forward to. We will get to it. Other details that I wanted to follow up with you on for your last meeting, you had a question about Robert's rules and whether chairs could participate. Linked in the agenda is a resource for those who want to read more about it. But the answer that I found is that yes, chairs can participate in discussions and votings. And some of our understandings about that are urban or rural legends, as the case may be. Our co-chairs need to do their best to model impartiality, and I think the co-chair structure will help quite a bit with that. But when they are moved to do so, they can participate in discussion and can vote. So that's the answer to that question. Keith mentioned census data. We had some outreach from a community or board member about Vermont's latest census data. And so linked in your board packet and on hard copy in the materials at the door is excerpts from the Vermont Center for Geographic Information census data with a link to the original site. And I added at the very bottom census totals for the 2 school districts, for Addison Northwest and Mount Abraham. I didn't have anyone check my math, so if I made a mistake, I'm open to that feedback. But this will be a handy reference for one, reflecting on population and student enrollment, thinking about what Keith just said about it, verifying or validating some of the trends that have been seen locally. And when we talk about board configuration for whatever union structures you are interested in exploring, this will be important data that we circle back to. So just another resource for you. Sure.
So that, the 7,600 and the 10,600, that is the total population of the communities in the district. It's not the student population.
Right.
So do we have a number that shows us what the student population difference, do we have that close by over the 10-year period?
I mean, we could pull it from the 2 different NASDAQ reports.
Yeah, because when I see 0.00, 0.03, I'm like, why are we here? But clearly, there's a much bigger issue with the student population.
Vermont has an aging population.
No, I
so
understand
that's-
that,
That's
but-
part of the story. But we can pull our NASDAQ and
Okay, yeah.
give you that.
It'd
Just
just be
take-
nice to see the difference there.
Absolutely, and we'll definitely be looking at those historical trends as well as projections. All right. Did want to mention that it is my understanding that Lincoln voted to withdraw, and I noticed that the Addison Independent updated their clarification of the process. I don't see them here tonight, but if you're out there, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and thoroughness. The process for withdrawal from a unified union applies, and the next step in the process is for the municipalities to coordinate a vote on the same date and time after they receive certification of the vote results from the Secretary of State. And there isn't a timeline in statute for that. It might be useful to pay attention to what's happening in Ripon and as a potential model for how things might go. But the next steps are to be determined in that. There is no role necessarily for the committee or Mount Abraham in informational meetings or plannings of that, but we will keep it in mind and talk about possible implications tonight and beyond as we're looking at possible governance structures. I've also heard that Addison voted not to withdraw, but a revote is planned. And Starksboro has taken steps to express their interest in strategies to ensure that schools are not closed. I don't know if anybody has anything to add to those updates or whether there is we didn't receive any information from any boards that said we really need to share X with you, but certainly if anybody else has updates that are worthwhile or additions to what I've said, they're welcome. Okay, seeing none. In the packet at the door is an updated draft work plan. You'll notice that there's a new date in the top right corner that's highlighted in yellow. I just want to reflect for you the evolutionary nature of the work plan and the beginnings of adapting work plan strategies based on the decisions and directions and feedback that you give at committee meetings. I did correct the locations. I added a possible timeline for dedicated conversation by the committee about community engagement. And also based on feedback and discussion at the meeting and information about the issues of concern that have been raised, explicitly added on page 2 a possible timeline for dedicated discussion of school closure. Not set in stone, but really wanted to make sure that the committee heard that that's important and is a worthwhile thing to have as a dedicated item on the work plan. Timelines could change, but really wanted to reflect responsiveness to what we're hearing and what we're learning throughout the process. So that's the brief updates on details and questions that you had.
Do you have any questions, comments? Okay, move on to the next agenda item, governance options overview. Again, Tracy will lead that discussion.
All right. I sent for you linked in the agenda, if you had time, some 2 pages from a resource from the Vermont School Boards Association, which gives some basic information about school governance structures in Vermont. I want to talk a little bit about that, And then in the packet that's available at the door, I'll walk you through what might have been a PowerPoint, and might be in the future now that I know how to do it in our meeting construct, how these translate to our current governance structures. So I want to start by highlighting on the second page of that resource that I shared with you that school districts are one of the fundamental blocks of school governance in Vermont, and you're all pretty familiar with those, and I think have a close affiliation with your school district. School districts historically have been affiliated with individual municipalities, and they are entities that have been granted responsibility from the state of Vermont to oversee the delivery of education in public schools in their region. Historically, in our region here, Addison, Ferrisburgh, Bristol, Lincoln, Moncton, New Haven, Starksboro, they were all school districts that were affiliated with a town before the current merger. Do I have that right? Okay. Sometimes 2 or more school districts, historically often towns, agree to jointly own and construct and operate schools. In this region, Virgins Union Elementary and Virgins Union High used to be union school districts that were responsible for the education of students in a portion of the grades, and from multiple municipally affiliated school districts. And a unified union school district is what Addison Northwest and Mount Abe are now. They are a district that provides for the education of all students pre-K-12 for a region, and they aren't necessarily associated with a municipality, though they could be, right? South Burlington is a unified union school district that just serves the town of South Burlington. Winooski, Montpelier used to be. So there are other examples of that. So school districts focus on operating schools. Going back to the front page, there's also a construct in Vermont and in other states that tend to be more rural that of something that is called here a supervisory union, or the equivalent of that in other rural places. And these are education service organizations that work to ensure equal educational opportunities for all students in a region. They seek to provide effective and efficient governance and administration and educational expertise. They go back to the early 1800s when those one-room schoolhouses didn't necessarily have the resources on their own to have their own business management and their own educational expert to oversee their teachers. I love the idea of the superintendent on the horse riding from school to school. The job was different then. But the idea is that a supervisory union provides the management in terms of administration and the educational expertise needed needed for a region that might not be able to provide it on its own. It's important to know that in Vermont, supervisory unions are created and assigned by the State Board of Education. We can ask for certain supervisory union assignments. We can give input, and I am confident that input and requests will be very thoughtfully heard. But in the end, that's a state board decision, not a decision of local voters or a board or another governing entity. A supervisory district is much like a supervisory union in that it includes all of the administrative management and educational leadership functions of a supervisory union along with the school district. So that's what you are now in Addison Northwest and Mount Abraham. And again, districts like South Burlington have one budget, one board, one superintendent, operate multiple schools as a single entity, so they're not separate. I wanted to also mention, because I think it's important in this region, that the supervisory functions that go with the organization of an educational system are not just about effective management, right? Having only the number of accountants that you need on staff and not more than you actually need. They're also not just about high quality educational leadership, right? Having the capacity to attract and retain good leaders who can oversee, support, guide, coordinate quality education. But they're also about educational continuity, right? Making sure that the educational experience for students is viewed through a pre-K-12 lens, because that's how students experience it, and reflective of the real life circumstances. Reflective of the real life circumstances that families encounter. They sometimes move, right? Or have kids in multiple schools. And a supervisory union structure is a structure that can help to be responsive to that, whether it's in a supervisory district or a supervisory union with member districts. Yes.
Is there time for questions somewhere along here?
I would welcome your question, and if I might answer it better later, I'll tell you that.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure whether now or later. You made a statement that the state board creates supervisory unions. So thinking about Ripton and Lincoln, they need, well, the Lincoln proposal was to be, to purchase services from a supervisory union. That was what they proposed on the 10th of August. Is that a model that's available to them? And then could the state board force MAUSD to become a supervisory union and accept Lincoln and or Ripton? Could the same happen in Middlebury? Force them to move from a unified district to a supervisory union structure in order to accommodate the needs of Ripton and Lincoln?
I can answer that better in a few minutes.
Okay.
And if I don't answer the question, I just made a note about the purchase service. Remind me then. Okay, thank you.
I have a quick follow-up question. My understanding was that the supervisory union that Ripton was trying to get into, my understanding was that they said no, and you're saying it's from a state, so I'm curious if they have the right to say no, or if they're going to be assigned somewhere. I might be wrong on that, but that was my understanding, was that White River said no.
Yep, I can address that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So high level, handwritten in my notes at the bottom of this handout. Basically, this committee has a limited set of options based on the charge aligned with 16 VSA section 706. The committee could recommend no merger, no new union. You could recommend a unified union, a pre-K-12 union that would include those supervisory union functions. Or you could recommend a union, and the common configurations of the union tend to be pre-K through grades 4, 5, or 6, so a union elementary school, a middle level elementary school starting at 5, 6, 7, or 8, and a high school typically 9 through 12, or some combination thereof. I do want to say that I saw reference to a study in one of the community proposals about withdrawal that advocated against 5 and 6 being part of middle school. And I would ask you to be open to the idea that there is a broad array of research that suggests that there might be more information worth exploring around best practice middle level education and the joys and strengths of 5 through 8 or 6 through 8 middle school. So please keep open minds to those possibilities. It's a really important developmental age where the brain grows more than any other time other than early childhood, toddlerhood, and the developmental needs of early adolescence are very different from high school students and early elementary school students. So please stay open-minded around middle level education as you're thinking about your processes. And let me know and Patrick and Sheila know if you want more information about that. So basically, those options, unified union or some union school structure, or recommending maintaining the status quo are the options for this committee to weigh. Now to get to the real local nuances, in your packet is a paper version of a PowerPoint that translates those possibilities into possibilities for this context. So obviously, the current option reflects Addison Northwest and Mount Abraham as unified union districts, 2 separate districts, with 1 board, 1 budget, the administrative services as part of the governing entity, and they serve all students pre-K-12. And it's possible that this committee will recommend no change to that structure if you believe that 5, 10, 15, 25 years from now, this best serve our students and best be in the best interest of public education in our region here and in the state. So status quo.
Aye.
Would be the Addison Northwest School District would continue to exist with 1 board, 1 budget, and ultimate responsibility for students pre-K-12. Mount Anthony, Abe, I'm sorry. I hope that's the only time I do that, but feel free to remind me. Mount Abe would also continue to exist with 1 board, 1 budget, and serving students pre-K-12. And in concept, those 2 entities would work together to form a new union school district. I'll call it New Union School District, with a board and a budget that would oversee the schools and education of some subset of your collective pre-K-12 populations. in that construct, your supervisory union administrative services would need to be removed from the individual districts and assigned to a supervisory union, which would be TBD to be determined by the State Board of Ed. And that would have its own board budget, and that's where the central office administration would be located, right? It could be a newly created supervisory union, or it could be an existing one. And I would expect the State Board of Ed would listen carefully to your requests and recommendations. If that was your recommendation, I would suspect that they would create a new supervisory union for this entity, but I don't know, and it's not our decision. Yeah.
I'm gonna be slow on this, but in this picture, in what the proposal is that these two on the outside go away and we're left with the middle.
Nope.
No. So I'm not understanding.
So it might look like Mount Abe continues to operate elementary and middle schools, and Addison Northwest continues to operate elementary and middle schools, and you have a joint union high school.
Will we be adding boards and overhead and? Okay.
Mhm. I made a note in my things that I was thinking about, and it made me think of what I'm now calling our local spaghetti map, which is page 44 of Addison Northeast's 2016 governance study, which reflected the governance structure of the prior district before merger. So I love spaghetti, but it may not always be the best governance structure. It may be based on what you want to accomplish, but this certainly does create complex governance. Erica?
I guess I'm just also confused by the bottom row where it says each of these three districts would have responsibility for all of the grades, but then the one in the middle also has responsibility for some other.
Yeah.
Could you give maybe an example of a situation, how that works?
I could, to clarify, change the grade range. In theory, the member districts, through their collaboration at the union district, still own their students pre-K-12. So that's why it's messy and overlapping. But really, it's another board that oversees their education and makes the financial decisions.
Independently of the other boards, or?
Depends on the structure you create for that union board, but typically there's board members from the, well, there's different options. It depends on your structure.
Does such an example exist in the States?
Yes. My neighbor to the north, Lamoille North Supervisory Union, has a union elementary school district, a single municipality elementary district, a union middle high school with a tech center, and a supervisory union board. Lamoille North. And that is streamlined from their prior governance.
Yeah, this is almost dreamy compared to what each of our districts used to be from a governance perspective in terms of numbers of districts. So this, a way I think of this could be, a Virginia school district and a Ferrisburg school district that have a union high school and a supervisory union structure over it almost could be overlaid on here to think of it from a simple perspective.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm as confused as everybody else, I guess. So let's say that there, in this bottom part, a new union school district is formed, and it has, for purposes of argument, it has it's looking after pre-K to 4, 5, 6, okay? But not 5, 6, 5 to 8, 9, 12. And now on the left-hand side, it says that the ANWSD, supervises pre-K to 12. Does that change? Would that only be like, 7 to 12? Or is there overlapping jurisdiction here?
I accept an argument that it could change and the primary responsibility is 7 through 12. And each entity would operate schools to educate 7 through 12, knowing that there was a board that.
It's doing 1 through 6.
Yeah.
Okay, so you kind of cross out the pre-K through 12.
Yes, cross it out, it's added confusion. Consider it removed.
Okay.
Except for expense purposes. Because
Yes. Yes.
but again, the Virginia School District, which is part of this supervisory union that would have a Virgin's Union High School, the taxes of the people in Virgin's pay for the expenses for kids K through 12.
You'll have 2 tax rates. You'll have your elementary tax rate. You've probably had this before. Or you'll have your union tax rate and you'll have your non-union tax rate. And in that way, maintain your responsibility.
Justin was
So
next, and then Dave.
we all came from 2 supervisory unions, Virgin's and Bristol. And it's on page 44 of the Mount Abe 46 proposal. But I was thinking, for example, it would be on the left of this chart would be Mount Abe district operating pre-K through 6 or 5, and Addison Northeast pre-K through 5, and then the union would be 6 through 12. Each of those would have a board. They would be responsible. Finance-wise, it's helpful to think what Patrick was talking about. You own these students pre-K through 12. So you get a cost devolved from the middle school and the high school back to your Mount Abe district or your Addison Northeast district, and you incorporate that in your tax structure for those communities. A setup like this would have the same tax rate for the 4 remaining towns in the Mount Abe district and the towns in the Addison Northeast district would have a unified tax rate for those communities, because you'd own all the pupils from those communities.
Before we dive too deeply into the pros and cons, let's see if we can hear from Dustin, and I can tell you a little bit more about the other options, as well as how withdrawals might come into play.
Yeah, I was just trying to help people understand the supervisory.
Oh, yes, perfect, thank you, I appreciate that.
So I was just going to ask, so, I'm looking at the union option 1CD, the one where there's, a large, a new supervisory union that's an umbrella over everything, but you have a union school, that district that's sharing some grade levels, but you still have MEUs, DNAs, and WSD in there as separate, 2 separate boards. And I noticed like MEUSD would maintain, a board, a budget, and show it in WSD. Would it be possible to have this and they each have their own board, but they don't each have their own budget? I don't know. I see having the separate budgets is, I don't know. I'm just thinking about moving towards equity, and if we have different districts within the same umbrella, but they have different. Is there a way in this model where they could maintain their boards, their districts, but share a budget?
Let me answer that in a minute and think.
Okay.
going back to the options, union option 2 is a unified union for pre-K 12, where there's a new unified union school district. It would be a supervisory district, so your central office, your supervisory union functions would be in there. One board, one budget, one administration, pre-K 12, right? I think that's what people have been thinking a lot about here. Okay. That was the easy one, which is why I did that one last. All right, so with those constructs in mind, the former structure, as Dave summarized, is familiar to you, as well as the concept of a single unified union made up of the 2 member districts. What happens if somebody withdraws? And this is my best thinking about what happens, but as you already highlighted by your questions, there are unknowns and there are things that are outside of what's explicitly framed in statute or precedent or rules, and are really going to be up to the State Board of Education probably, and regional considerations. So the first slide is the current option with district withdrawal. If one district withdraws, or even multiple districts withdraw, Addison Northwest and Mount Abraham continue to exist, the district is withdrawn and becomes its own fiscal entity, and it will be, I believe, assigned to a supervisory union by the State Board of Education. I think it's fair, somebody asked, can they just purchase services? I think it's fair to say that you can purchase services, but it's likely that that is in the same way that services were purchased in your former supervisory union structures. You're assessed a proportionate share of the cost based on the formulas in statute or local agreement, and if applicable, and you are a member of the supervisory union. I don't see any examples where that is not the case, and you can just be your own district and buy the pieces and parts that you want for the price that you think you want to pay. My personal belief is the district will have to be assigned to a supervisory union and get their services that way. I also think, and we can study this if it's helpful, but if it's not, let's not put a lot of resource into understanding. I think it's unlikely that the state would, and maybe they can't, undo voluntarily merged union school districts. That's different from a supervisory union. So I don't know if they can, but, and I don't know if they will, but the common understanding is that integrated administrative and education service delivery model is the most efficient and effective when it can work well. So if you want me to look more into that, I can, but I don't think it's going to be super relevant to us unless the state board actually or a withdrawing district asks.
Tracy?
Yeah.
So I have a question about this. Would this SU you have off to the right, wouldn't that in effect that would be over the whole thing, wouldn't it?
No,
It would
what we
stand
have right
separately?
It would need, because if we maintain the current options, because Addison Northwest and Mount Abe are supervisory districts,
So there's 3 superintendents here?
the withdrawing district would need to go to a place with a governance structure that could accommodate their school district. And Mount Abe, sorry, darn, once I did it once. And Addison Northwest do not have that kind of governance
Oh, I
structure.
see, okay.
Right?
I see, yes, thank you.
So I suspect they would be assigned somewhere else. And here's what I'd say to the Lincoln folks in the room. That method allows you to pay really good attention to your K-6, pre-K-6 students, but it doesn't necessarily solve 712, your obligation to oversee, support, ensure quality. It doesn't, if your students are using choice, accessing choice and going to the other high schools in the region, and they're still struggling with program cuts, enrollment declines, and challenging circumstances, your students are still going to be experiencing that, okay? And there are some other variables for districts that do not provide through designation or through membership for the educational continuity of their kids pre-K-12. So this isn't a Lincoln meeting, but it's a thing to think about.
So, since you opened that door, isn't there a district in Londonderry that includes Londonderry that's like 5 or 6 or 7 towns that operate K through 6 and tuition or voucher out their students 7 through 12? How do they handle SPED and other education quality issues that you just referred to?
I can research Londonderry's structure. I served a community that operated a grades 1 through 3 one-room schoolhouse, had a designated elementary school, and at one point offered choice in grades 7 through 12. So I'm really familiar with the challenges and the opportunities of that model.
Yeah.
And what it means for special ed costs and things like that.
We might have to invite you to a MUSD district meeting.
So I showed you the current option with a district withdrawal and what it might look like. If you went to, if it was recommended and ultimately approved by the voters and you went to a union with a union school for some grades with district withdrawal, one thing that could happen is that that same structure of a new supervisor union with 3-member districts, the old Mount Abe, Addison Northwest, and our new union school in the new union district could exist, and the withdrawn district could go somewhere else. That's up to the state board. Quickly flipping the page, it's also possible that the withdrawn district could be assigned to the new union school district, and maybe they even want to be a part of the union. So that gets more complicated for me to project for you, but that's a possibility. At a minimum, you're at 5 boards, 5 budgets, and a lot of spaghetti. First Sarah, and then Troy.
So just to clarify though, if on one CD, the new supervisory union board would be comprised of 3 people from Madison Northwest, 3 people from MAUSD, and potentially the withdrawn district would get 3 people also at that situation.
And potentially, and 3 from the union school district.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Supervisory union governance is not, but there is, and I can study it more deeply if you get to this place. There are options for alternatives to the SU board structure and statute, and a process for doing that, which I've been through. So there's possibility for other structures. Troy?
So I have a question, and maybe you can't answer this. This is probably a state question, but I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about committing to a situation that a district could opt out of and then be put back in if the point is to provide continuity and provide the best education and contain costs, but then you got people jumping in and out. I don't know how that helps. Like, is that a state question? Like, can we say, no, sorry, you left the marriage,
Yep. So that was a question earlier that I didn't answer. Could you say, no, you left the marriage, we don't want you back? Can
Well, it feels like
another
they're coming back on their own
supervisory union?
terms.
Yeah, can another supervisory union, White River, say, no, we don't want them? I don't know the answer to that. I think, again, the State Board of Ed is going to have to make some really tough
Okay, so it's the
decisions.
state.
And I think that they've always considered the voices of the organizations that are impacted. So I think if an entity says, no, I really don't want them, we really can't welcome them and serve them well, and here's why, they're going to take that into consideration very thoughtfully. No, I mean, we're using really casual language and saying, you know, you divorced us, we don't want you back.
Well, it's not that about the relationship. It's more about how do we have continuous planning about our budgets and our students and long-range thinking
And
if we can't ensure what districts are a part of our union.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say as well. So when another supervisory union says, we really can't do a good job, we don't want them in our SU, they're going to have sound education, administration, and cultural reasons for that recommendation. So it's not as simple as wanting or not wanting, based on my experience with education.
I think Dustin is.
Okay, Dustin?
I was just gonna ask, because in this option 1B, is the boards, I heard, 3 representatives from this board, 3 representatives from this board, 3 and 3. Would it really be each of these would have the exact same number of representatives, or would it be weighted more by size of your district?
It depends on which governing entity you're talking about. For a supervisory union board, there's a statutory formula that's 3 per district, unless you go through a process to come up with something else. If you formed a new union high school district or a new unified union district, there are different rules that apply, and they require more of that one person, one vote. And the way that you can navigate that, there's 2 or 3 options, and when we figure out what we're looking at, we can model some of those considerations for a structure that might be viable in this context. So for SUs, that's the basic standard. For supervisory districts and school districts, it's more aligned to population, one person, one vote.
And for what it's worth, Dustin, so for example, when we were Addison Northeast Supervisory Union, each of the districts, so Starksboro had a board, the Starksboro Town School District Board was 3 people. All 3 were on the Supervisory Union Board. Bristol Town School District had a board of 5 people, I think. 3 of those 5 were on the board. So it was 3 from each sending district.
So sorry, Erin.
To clarify, excuse me, on this sheet,
Yeah.
it says, according to statute, districts that operate schools have 3 representatives on the supervisory union board. Districts that do not operate schools have 1 representative on the supervisory union board. So would that mean, like, for example, in Addison Northwest, towns like Panton and Waltham that don't have a school, is that what they mean when they say a district that doesn't operate a school?
Let me give you an example from another place. And again, we can dive into the specifics when we know more of where we want to focus our energies, because we could come up with endless possibilities. In a supervisory union in the Northeast Kingdom, before Act 46, there was a K-12 district, there were a handful of elementary districts, one of which was a union school district, and then there was a union middle high school, and there was a K-6 operating district with choice. Super complex, makes Mount Abe's old structure look clean. In that structure, in their supervisory union, the union school district, which was a union between two municipalities, had a rep on the board, and the two municipalities that formed the union had a rep on the board. So it depends on your structure and the grade you're operating. But there are circumstances where systems might have one rep. Kevin?
So with a supervisory union, each town or each district, whatever the case may be, votes a budget that probably shakes out to some sort of an equalized pupil per equalized pupil spending. And they may not necessarily be the same between the different schools, even though they're suspended in anticipation of adopting the merger study, so who knows where that's going to go. But is the supervisory union held accountable at the supervisory union level to stay underneath the threshold for equalized pupils, or would it be up to each sub-school, if you will, or a sub-district to stay within that and not impact the other entities in that supervisory union?
Option B, right? You're in it together and impacted by the decisions of the other districts in your system, as well as the decisions at the supervisory union level.
So you could have a high spending district, if you will, that could impact other districts that may not be spending at that rate.
Depending on the circumstances and your governance structure. The reality is, a couple things. When you're asking about impacts from other districts, first of all, we're a statewide funded education system, right? So every decision about spending that's made everywhere in the state impacts us, right? Our base rates, our non-homestead rates, and our homestead rates are all inflated if 2/3 of the state are not making responsible fiscal decisions. The other piece that I would add that I think is really important to think about is it's easy to focus on having a successful school, right? And doing a really good job with a piece of the puzzle that you can get your arms around. Totally understand that feeling. Classroom teachers feel it as well too. It's really easy to focus on, if I can just take care of my kids, I'm doing my part, and that's good enough. But the reality is that one successful classroom does not make a successful school or a successful educational experience for kids, right? Their education experience extends throughout the school with multiple classes, multiple teachers, and it's a pre-K-12 experience, right? So doing a good job means that we have to do a good job, not as individual schools, but all of us do a good job as individual schools. And that means in a region, it also means to a large extent in the state. We're all in this together, and if we're living in an apartment complex and the roof is failing in the unit 3 doors down and it's not fixed, eventually that's going to get to us, right? And our educational infrastructure is going to be compromised if we don't look at the well-being of the whole, the pre-K-12 experience and the regional experience. Being the best in the middle of average is not good enough for our kids. We're at a pivotal point in history where we're entering a global society where it's really clear that what happens elsewhere in the world has an immediate impact on our lives. We're all wearing masks. and sweating in August. It's really clear that we're global. Our society, our economy, and the work that our kids are doing is global as well, and information-based. We are no longer sorting for the blue-collar managers and the factory workers. And we need to think differently about how we work together to ensure that our schools were designed to be more like factories and sift and sort kids and develop managers and workers. How our schools prepare kids to work in an information society that is globally connected and scientifically infused in terms of the realities that we all have to deal with. We've got a different job to do. And so that's just my soapbox.
Could I add just something to that? The largest single employers in the state are self-employed entrepreneurs in plumbing and electrical work, where we desperately need help. So I think we make a mistake if we focus just on college and white collar and computer operators. Yes, those are important in our society, there's no doubt. But growing importance that we've neglected for decades is our skilled labor workforce.
I love the image on one of the websites of the row of tractors in front of the school. I thought that was fabulous. So, was that a traumatic moment at the time for the administration?
No,
Okay.
no. Driver tractor to school.
It happens every year.
Yeah.
It's a yearly thing.
Yeah.
Well, and to that end, I also love the Wayfinder Academy and the infusion of social emotional learning into the curriculum, which is something this region could be very proud of and could be the basis for preparing people to be self-employed, post-secondary, globally connected, information enriched, problem solving, and contributing citizens. So I think that's amazing. I want to talk to you about the last option really quickly and then move on. Last option is super simple. It's the new unified union school district is formed and somebody withdraws. If that happens, it's unlikely that the voluntarily merged UU will be made a member of a supervisory union. So if a district withdraws, they'll likely be assigned somewhere else by the State Board of Ed and share in the supervisory union responsibilities. We are scheduled at the request of a committee member to take a brief break, and it's perfect timing for me to do that. When we come back from the break, I'm going to move you into a discussion of some ideas that could lead to the framework for goals and criteria for decision-making down the road. As a reminder, estimate that a decision about whether or not you recommend a merger would be no sooner than December. Our process, I hope, will be to define some criteria, develop the best union option, do an analysis of the current state in the future, what that looks like, what that might be 5, 10, 25 years from now. Our best union option, what does that look like 5, 10, 25 years from now? And then based on that, what do we recommend going forward? So tonight, thinking about criteria. We're going to do that in a restorative circle process where folks, I'll tell you about the process when we come back from break, but you'll be posed a question where we would invite you to share your thoughts from your heart about what the answer to that question might be. Some people need think time. So if you are a I need think time person, as you're taking a 5-minute break, stretching your legs, on your way to that, come see me and I will give you the questions in advance so you can think in advance if that meets your needs. Okay? So we're going to reconvene. It's not going to be a full 5 minutes because I have a lot I want to do.
And I just want to say, if anybody needs a break, you need to go to the bathroom, you need to get water, you know, even if the rest of us are still moving on, you know, go ahead. You need to stand up and stretch while we're talking, please do that. Okay, so 3 minutes?
3 minutes. Take longer if that's what you need. If you need a question.
They're right around.
Schools are increasingly using restorative circles with just adults and with students and adults together because they're useful to promote a safe, respectful learning environment where all voices are heard. So when we want to share our own lives, our own experiences, our own beliefs and values, and when we want to focus on feelings and impacts, restorative circles are really good for that. I'm going to give you a quick overview of how the circle works, and then we'll move into it. Again, this is adapted. So the first thing I want to tell you is that geometry matters in a circle. The circle itself is important. It allows everybody to see and be seen face to face, even though our faces are somewhat limited. And it creates a common center, both literally and figuratively. So there is no room for sides, and there is plenty of room for accountability as body language is visible to all, and there's no space for hierarchies. So circle is important. In the circle, there is a physical centerpiece. It's a focal point that you are welcome to use that helps support speaking and listening from the heart. Participants are invited to speak to the center of the circle. And I've brought 2 centerpieces, this container and this basket, which have personal meaning for me, which I won't share with you tonight, maybe some other time if we have more circle time, that can serve as your centerpieces tonight. One of the reasons that having personally selected focal points and talking pieces is it really shows that the person organizing the circle cares and has put some thought into organizing the circle for the evening. Restorative circles have talking pieces. They are tools to regulate the dialogue of participants. The talking piece is truly passed from person to person around the circle, and only the person holding the talking piece can speak. It allows the speaker to speak without interruption, and it allows listeners to focus on listening. You don't have to worry about having to chime in or when your next is going to come. Your turn will come when the talking piece comes to you. So you don't have to think about a response or what you might contribute. It ensures that everybody has an opportunity to speak, or you can pause for a moment of silence, or you can say pass and pass the talking piece along. And it shows that we believe that everyone has something significant to contribute to the group. I have 2, my elephant in the room and my magic wand. And also I brought some hand sanitizer that can go around after, and it smells good. Each of you in your packets has a set of guidelines for the circle. Circles work best when they're guidelines. And if we were a class or a group or an organization that was using circles regularly, we would probably spend some time developing guidelines and practicing them, especially with kids. Practice the talking piece and how to pass it, all of those things. But generally, you'll find that the guidelines are similar. So in the interest of time this evening, I have given each of you some common guidelines and ask for your agreement to follow them. They are respecting the talking piece. So I mean it when I ask that you allow the person with the talking piece to be the only one talking and others listen. I ask that you speak from your heart, This is an opportunity to share what you think or feel, or what others may have shared with you, share their perspectives or ideas. It's not a time to respond to others, debate, or disagree. It's really a time for everyone to share their ideas and listen thoughtfully to the ideas of others. We ask that you speak and listen with respect. That may seem obvious, but I have been in places where I've heard people say hurtful, mean things. And I'm not going to give you examples of that, but ask that you be respectful and speak about your feelings, not your evaluation of other people's feelings, for example. I also, when you think about respect, ask you to think about the duration of your comments. Take the time you need to say what you need to say, while also respecting the need to give other people a chance to share their feelings. Ask that you remain present, phones off. There's no need for you to take notes during this process. Lori and I will take notes. And one of the common circle guidelines is honor confidentiality. Obviously, this is not a confidential circle, but I ask that you honor the circle, so what's shared here stays here. Try and avoid those follow-ups where you say, oh, I heard you say this. I disagree with what you said, or I think that too. It's okay to talk about the process, because if this is looking like a useful process, we could potentially use it with community engagement opportunities. I also want to assure you, I'm nervous about time, and you can tell because I'm talking really fast, that I'll provide some additional opportunities for you to add your voice in response to the questions for tonight. And we will work together to synthesize this work and the content together in the hopes that it provides some really solid fodder for thinking about criteria for evaluating status quo in the future and our best idea of what a union might be in the future. Could be helpful to think about the resources that you may have reviewed prior to tonight's meeting, the current state presentations, and again, anything that can add to thinking about key ideas for a cost-benefit study or a pros and cons analysis. So with that, there are 2 circles set up. Sheila's going to facilitate one, and Patrick's going to facilitate the other, and Gloria and I will each sit in one and take notes. I ask that you move to a circle with questions in hand, if that's helpful to you, and Patrick and Sheila have some extra copies. Try and mix yourselves up a little bit. I didn't take the time to assign you to circles, but try and not be from the same, all from the same perspective. And let's go. They have questions. Okay. So thank you all for giving that a shot. Not surprisingly, we didn't have enough time. Always like to over-prepare. I will debrief with the co-chairs and think about options for continued opportunities to ensure committee member voice in a way that leads to establishing a framework. It could be an online tool, or it could be like a virtual anonymous survey, or it could be dedicating some more time at the next meeting for continuing the circle protocol. But thanks for giving it a try, and thanks for your contributions. As a facilitator, they'll really help me to understand how to prioritize work going forward. So I really appreciate that.
And Tracy will summarize after the next meeting.
Yes, my goal would be to synthesize and summarize, and then engage the committee in refining those ideas. The question I still haven't thought through is when to do that, and that will depend on, whether we decide to come back and spend a bigger chunk of time at the next meeting on some of the other key questions that might be helpful for us to explore. So we'll figure it out, and there will be a synthesis. It's just a question of when.
So next item is draft articles. Oh, anybody had anything else on that? Okay, draft articles necessary in advisory districts, and again, Tracy, you can lead us.
Prepare those. So to get you started with the administrative processes of forming a union, I have drafted what I had hoped would be the easiest articles to start your discussion. Of course, nothing is simple, but to give you an idea of how it works, how it might work, I've taken a shot at Article 1 and 2. Article 1 being what districts are necessary for the formation of the union. Oop, and there's a typo. And what entities might be advisable. And they're pretty simple. The school districts of Addison Northwest and Mount Abraham are necessary for the establishment of the new union school or supervisory district. I don't know what it's going to be yet. You don't know what it's going to be yet. And because there are some withdrawals in the offing, a possible Article 2 could look like the Lincoln School District, if it's formed, is advisable. It could include other school districts. It could not include Lincoln or another withdrawing school district if the committee so recommends. But this gives you a simple snapshot of how the first two articles could look. And my request would be that you identify whether these feel like comfortable working articles, understanding that nothing's final until the report's final and the recommendation is final. And clearly things are going to be changing in our process based on your decision-making and on things outside the committee's work.
Sarah, did you have something?
Could you explain what is advisable means?
Oh, great question. Obviously, in order for a union of any sort in the scope that we're talking about to be possible, Mount Abe and Addison Northwest need to say yes. In some circumstances, there may be school districts that could join or not join. So if you include Lincoln as an advisable school district, they would get to vote on whether or not to join the union and all the terms that come with it. And if the union is formed by the necessary districts, so if Addison Northwest and Mount Abe vote yes, it happens, right? Lincoln's vote doesn't matter. It happens. But if Lincoln, an advisable district, votes yes, they're in as well. And if they vote no, they're off to the State Board of Ed for a different supervisory union. So advisable districts can be included when the circumstances are right and welcomed in if they choose to be a part of the process and vote yes.
And is it true that any district could be deemed advisable by this group, whether they're represented as this group or not?
Probably.
Can I clarify at what point would they potentially not be part of the Mount Abe school district so that they don't vote is this like a completely a timing thing?
If they're included as an advisory district in your merger, that vote needs to happen on the same day during the same hours as Addison Northwest and Mount Abraham vote, And again, they both have to vote yes for it to go.
Are
What's
they
tricky for
voting
me,
twice, I guess is my question. Are they voting as part of Mount Abe and as part of Lincoln?
if they've withdrawn, they're no longer part of Mount Abe,
Okay.
right? So if they haven't withdrawn, then they are. What's tricky for me to answer questions about Lincoln is there's no authorized governing body overseeing that district. So I don't know how we would, because there's no elected school board, I don't know how we would go to an appropriately elected body to say, do you want to be a part of the study or not, as an advisable district?
And then my question is related to Sarah. So until Lincoln separates, which there is a process that, I mean, technically Ripon hasn't separated from Addison Central yet, I believe.
Yeah.
So I think it's unlikely if we are moving this stuff for a March vote or a November vote of next year, it's extremely unlikely that Lincoln will have separated from the district.
Totally trust your analysis and defer to the committee as to what you want to have as a working frame right now. I just wanted to show you what that could look like because I knew it would be a question.
Just to completely muddy the waters. So if I'm a Lincoln resident and I'm hearing all this, if Lincoln voted on that same date at that same time to join this new whatever is proposed, would that negate the vote they just had because now they're just back in to the supervisory union?
Lincoln would have to get their own legal advice, but possibly, yeah.
Yeah, they'd be joining a new district. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to work that all out in my head.
Yeah, and it really depends on where they are in their withdrawal process.
Yeah.
It is muddy.
So, are there any other questions on this? My thought would be, since it's a working document, we don't really need a vote because we're not adopting this, but maybe just a thumbs up to have this in place now, and as we move forward, we can, we'll amend it and adopt it. So can I see thumbs up if you guys are good with using this as a working document? Dave, I think you're the only one. I don't see a thumbs up. Do you have some concerns?
Is this a working document or no?
This, these back 1 and 2?
Yeah.
We're not voting.
Sure.
Okay.
All right,
We have another.
That's fine as a working document.
it only gets harder.
Okay. Hey, so communication key points, at the end of every meeting, we kind of try to put together a summary of key points, takeaways from the meeting that we can disseminate. So if people have items they want added to that, or you can try to summarize, raise your hand if you have something.
I write a committee brief for you. What should it include?
Out to the public?
Yep.
That we took a look at and asked a lot of questions about some potential supervisory / district options and got a lot of clarifications and created some questions to be answered.
In the circle, it was good to hear from our neighbor district what's good and what's not so good over there.
I would coin that as almost more values as opposed to goals, like we did in the survey.
Erica?
I don't want to forget that we started with a report from each of the boards about the context, and I think that was very helpful, and I appreciate
Okay, anything else? Sorry, Dustin, I didn't.
Oh, I said we looked at census data and declining populations.
We do have the answer to Troy's question about the student population,
Oh.
since that was looking at the total population. So in MAUSD, in the 10 years from fiscal year 11 to fiscal year 21, our enrollment decreased by 309 students, which is just under 2%.
2% annually?
So 309 students is just under 2% of the 1,600 something that we
Okay.
had.
I did
2%
mine a
total
little bit
over 10
differently, but in that same period of time, we declined by 299, which is a 26% reduction. So I did it a little bit differently.
We'll get you, you will have the enrollment data as part of the study, so
Yeah.
more to come, and we'll have
I think
consistent.
that's important, because that's significantly greater than what the
Yes, yeah.
population shows.
We will get that for you.
The NESDEC reports are excellent because they also provide a lot of broader context in terms of what happened with housing, including census data, lots of other births, lots of other points that would be useful, I think.
I had a decimal point issue, just under 20%, 19.6, I think is what it was.
Yeah, okay, that makes more
That
sense.
sounds better.
Okay, we're,
That's what I'm like, per year?
That's
I think they were kept on the website.
We're gonna move to public comment. Don't see anybody in the room. Is there anyone on, remotely on the meeting that had any comments or wanted to speak? You don't say anything?
I believe Susan's the only one
Yes.
from the audience.
Sure. Susan, okay.
Christopher has a comment. Just would like to reiterate that the discussion groups be included in the minutes.
I have a question, maybe, I have a question not as a, can I be an audience member for a second? Maybe, I don't know. And maybe this is a question for anybody is anybody in town government or state government? So when I look at the census numbers, and I just looked at the heat map that they showed, Chittenden County grew at X rate in Lamoille County and Franklin County. And I'm just wondering, what are we doing or not doing? Why are people not coming south as much as they're going north? And there could be all sorts of reasons, interstates and roads and job centers and all sorts of things. But I'm just wondering if our local, county, and state sort of business leaders and people who make permitting processes for housing, and are we making it so that our communities are inviting for families, so that if we have an amazing thing to offer these people, that we can have housing and put people and families and kids in them? If we have nowhere to put the people, we're barking up the wrong tree. So I just asked that question, is this also being discussed on a different level on how to get more homes, more affordable housing, more people moving into our counties, into our county versus into some of those other counties? Just throwing it out there. I don't know who or how we answer that, but maybe somebody heard it out there and we'll figure it out. I don't know.
Can I respond to that point? I've had a couple of initial communications at the state level on I can't remember the name of the acronym, but for each region, and sometimes it's by county, sometimes it's by region, they have an economic development plan, CED or something. Dave, do you remember what?
Yeah, there's one in
The CED.
Addison County.
There isn't one for Addison County, although it is being put together now, and presumably it's going to be in draft form for public comment, if I'm not mistaken, in 2022. So think that is one thing that other regions and counties, including like Chittenden, and I believe Lamoille is on that list too, have undertaken that.
County has had an economic development. Fred Kenny is the executive director, I believe, or whatever it is.
Erica and Kevin, go ahead, Erica.
I don't know a lot about this, but I know that in Ferrisburg, the zoning was recently re-evaluated, and my impression when Addison was talking about leaving our district, there was a lot of conversation in the public comment parts of the school board meetings about this issue. So certainly, at least in Ferrisburg, people seem to be talking about it and aware of it.
Kevin, did you have?
So I'm on the Bristol Planning Commission. Maybe I shouldn't start it that way, but the Planning Commission just adopted a down plan, so it probably won't be another one for a number of years. But there is a buzz, and the in-between homework seems to be starting to focus on housing, and that seems to be a common thread with a lot of towns, at least in the county, if not throughout the state. One thing that, as we were developing our town plan, that was interesting or startling, if you will, is based on how families live, the density in houses is going down, if you will. There's a lot more single family people that are in houses, so all of a sudden, you've got what would have been a autonomous family, if you will, taking up 2 housing units, if you will, which has driven down, not only in Bristol, but in a lot of areas, the amount of people that can live in the area, if you will. And there's renewed interest in housing permits. You know, this year has been a lot of housing permits in Bristol comparatively to years past. But, you know, it's not going to make up the 200 or 300 students that, you know, Patrick and Sheila were alluding to earlier. So there's a huge, even if there is a desire for people to move into the area, there's a huge capacity deficit in the area.
Just to echo the same thing, I was invited to the Starksboro Planning Commission. I'm not a planning commissioner, like my esteemed colleague here, but basically addressing the same issues. So it all focuses on housing and liberalizing zoning, existing zoning regulations to encourage folks to move south from Heinsberg and South Burlington.
Well, otherwise, if nobody can ever move here,
right,
we're just going to keep having this conversation until there's nobody left.
And the other thing is, an urban center has a certain attraction for different groups of people, if you will, and a rural area cannot compete with those attractions.
But I specifically moved out of Chittenden County into Bristol so I could watch my kids walk to the elementary school from my porch.
You're the exception, though, unfortunately.
All right.
It might be interesting, maybe in one of these meetings, to invite somebody from 1 or 2 or 3 of the planning commissions to talk about this and get some hard information, what their thinking is.
So something to look for, as an issue or topic to look for. We'll make a note of that. I think there wasn't any other public comment. We can delve into this particular issue more in depth at a later time.
I move to adjourn.
Thank you, Dave. Second, anybody?
Second.
Keith, second. All those in favor?
Aye.